Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, it really helps.
Today, we're taking a close look at the federal indictment against Sean Combs, known by quite a few names over the years: Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, Diddy, and, well, Love.
Yeah, and our focus for this deep dive is really to get into the weeds of the indictment itself. What are the core allegations? What's the timeline they're talking about, which, I mean, it covers something like 2 decades.
2 decades, yeah. And we'll touch on the initial legal moves, too. We're working from the unsealed indictment, some related court documents, and news reports on the early trial proceedings.
Exactly. So the indictment itself, right off the bat, it lays out some incredibly serious claims. It's alleging this decades-long pattern.
A pattern of what, specifically?
Well, abuse, threats, coercion,
Yeah.
targeted at women and others, the alleged goal,
Mm-hmm.
to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and, keep everything hidden.
And it wasn't just him acting alone, according to this document.
No, not at all. The indictment claims he used his whole business structure, what they call the Combs business, so
Right.
Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global, basically using it as the engine for a criminal enterprise.
A criminal enterprise built on a music and media empire. That sounds ambitious.
It does. And this alleged enterprise, it supposedly involved members, associates, employees, engaging in or trying to engage in some really heavy felony offenses.
Like what?
The indictment lists sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, even arson, bribery, obstruction of justice. It paints a picture of a pretty organized alleged operation,
Centered where? Geographically.
primarily Manhattan and Los Angeles, according to the filing. And the abuse described, it wasn't just physical. It talks about a persistent and pervasive pattern, including verbal and emotional abuse, too.
Let's dig into the physical side for a moment. What specifics does the indictment mention there?
It details acts like striking, punching, dragging, throwing things, kicking, and importantly, it dates this alleged behavior back to at least in or about 2009 and continuing for years. So not just one incident.
Right. Establishing that alleged pattern over time seems key.
Definitely. And they highlight one specific, very publicized incident, March 2016, Los Angeles hotel. There's supposedly video footage.
The one showing him allegedly kicking, dragging, and throwing a vase at a woman trying to leave.
That's the one. And critically, the indictment also mentions an alleged attempt to bribe hotel security afterwards to, make it go away.
Wow. So allegedly committing the act and then actively trying to cover it up.
Precisely. And the indictment is careful to state that this alleged abuse wasn't just directed at women in relationships with him. It claims it extended to employees, potential witnesses, suggesting a broader climate of alleged intimidation.
Which connects back to the idea of the business being involved.
Exactly. It alleges that people within the Combs business, security, staff, assistants, even high-level supervisors were used to carry out, facilitate, and cover up the alleged abuse and commercial sex acts. They were like intermediaries, allegedly acting under Combs' control.
So this leads us to the structure of this alleged enterprise. How does the indictment define that?
It defines it as existing from at least in or about 2008, right up until the indictment was filed. That's over 15 years. It claims Combs and others were involved, working as a continuous unit with common goals.
And those goals were?
According to the document, pretty straightforward, if sinister. Enriching the members, promoting the enterprise itself, preserving Combs' power and status.
By protecting it all.
Yeah, that's crucial. Protecting the enterprise from detection, from prosecution, and the alleged methods for that. Intimidation, manipulation, bribery, threats against anyone who might talk.
Okay, so how did this alleged enterprise actually operate? What were the alleged means and methods? The indictment gets quite specific, doesn't it?
It does. One of the most graphic parts describes these alleged freak-offs.
Right, I read about those. Group sex parties.
Yeah, allegedly involving victims and commercial sex workers, often fueled by drugs. The indictment even claims Combs filmed these events sometimes. And there's a detail about providing IV fluids afterwards, which is quite disturbing.
It suggests something pretty extreme was allegedly happening, and enterprise members helped set these up.
Allegedly, yes. Booking hotels, making arrangements, facilitating the whole thing.
And beyond these specific events, what other methods of control are alleged?
It's a long list. Physical, emotional, verbal abuse, we've touched on that, but also dangling career opportunities, controlling finances, tracking people's locations.
Even dictating appearance and monitoring medical records.
Apparently so. Controlling housing, supplying drugs. It paints a picture of alleged total control over people's lives.
And the violence wasn't just at these parties, right?
No, the indictment mentions other specific acts: hitting, kicking, throwing things, dragging victims, sometimes by the hair, allegedly causing injuries.
And if people resisted, what allegedly happened then?
Threats. Threats to their careers, their livelihoods, using that power imbalance. And allegedly using those recordings from the freak-offs as leverage, blackmail, essentially, to keep people quiet and compliant.
The indictment also mentions firearms.
Yes, that Combs and his security sometimes carry firearms, allegedly for intimidation, and more general allegations of violence, throwing objects, throwing people, hitting, dragging, choking, shoving. It reinforces that alleged pattern of physical dominance.
And then there's the alleged cover-up effort, especially more recently.
Right. Following public allegations around late 2023, the indictment alleges witness tampering, more attempted bribery, providing false stories to conceal the alleged crimes. It even claims Combs recorded some calls related to this alleged obstruction.
So, with all that alleged activity, what are the actual federal charges filed in this indictment?
There are two main counts. Count one is racketeering conspiracy, the RICO charge.
Ah, RICO. That implies an organized criminal enterprise.
Exactly. It alleges this pattern of criminal activity going back to at least 2008, and the potential underlying acts cover a huge range: kidnapping, arson, using interstate facilities for commercial sex, forced labor, sex trafficking, transporting people for prostitution, drug offenses. It's broad.
A very serious, complex charge. What's count two?
Count two is specifically sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. This one names an alleged victim, identified as Victim 1, and covers the period from at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018.
Okay, so both counts allege activity spanning many years within that two-decade time frame.
Correct.
Now, moving to the court proceedings, the indictment was unsealed September 2024. What happened initially?
Well, the process started. Court documents show an initial trial date was actually set for May 5, 2025, after a status conference back in October 2024.
And we know the trial did begin. What was the defense's opening position, based on reports?
Their narrative, as reported, seems to be that this is all about personal issues, jealousy, money, infidelity, and totally separate from Combs' businesses.
So, acknowledging some issues, but denying federal crimes?
Pretty much. They apparently admitted Combs has a temper, has been violent, used drugs, and had an unconventional sex life. But they argue these are part of, toxic but consensual relationships, not federal offenses. They flatly deny sex trafficking or a racketeering conspiracy, basically saying the government shouldn't be involved in private lives.
Interesting strategy. And the prosecution's first witnesses, who did they call?
They started with testimony focused heavily on Cassie Ventura. First, Israel Flores, the former hotel security guard from that 2016 incident. He talked about Combs' demeanor, Ventura trying to leave, her initial reluctance to involve police.
And the second witness?
Daniel Phillip. He gave some pretty graphic testimony alleging Ventura paid him for sex acts with her while Combs watched, supposedly between 2012 and 2014 in New York. He also testified he saw Combs violently attack Ventura multiple times, but didn't step in because he was afraid.
So Cassie Ventura seems central, especially given her civil suit in late 2023 that settled so quickly.
Absolutely. Her allegations appear to be a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, trying to establish that long-term pattern of alleged abuse and coercion detailed in the indictment. She was expected to testify herself.
We also saw some legal back and forth early on, an appeal.
Yeah, Combs filed a notice of appeal in September 24, but it was withdrawn by January 25, an interlocutory appeal that didn't proceed. There was also some legal wrangling over notes taken from Combs during a prison sweep, issues of attorney-client privilege, court orders for the government to delete things, standard but complex procedural stuff.
And things kept moving towards trial.
Seems so. A pretrial conference was set for March 14, 2025, where Combs was also set to be arraigned on the superseding indictment. Plus, ongoing motions about evidence rules, witness identities, jury selection, culminating in things like the voir dire questionnaire being filed right around the initial trial date in May 2025. It indicates the trial was definitely moving forward.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into the indictment, it lays out a really detailed narrative of alleged abuse and exploitation spanning 2 decades, claiming Combs used his business empire to facilitate and hide it all.
And the initial trial phase really seemed to zero in on testimony concerning Cassie Ventura, using her prior allegations as a key pillar for the prosecution's case about this alleged long-running pattern.
When you look at the scope of these allegations in the indictment, the time frame, the alleged use of a major business, It really makes you think, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It raises huge questions about power, influence, celebrity, and how those things might intersect with alleged abuse within big organizations, and the immense difficulty in prosecuting complex allegations that stretch back so many years.
Definitely a lot to consider there. For anyone wanting to follow this, keeping up with trial reporting and any public court documents will obviously offer more insight as these legal proceedings unfold. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.